The night shift at Irvine Memorial Hospital always felt longer in October. I stood at the nurse's station, absently tapping my pen against the counter while reviewing patient charts. The harsh fluorescent lights made everything look pale and washed out, much like how I felt after pulling my third 12-hour shift this week. Thunder rumbled outside, and I glanced at my watch, 11:47 p.m. The ER had been unusually quiet, which typically meant trouble was brewing. 15 years of emergency medicine had taught me that much. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I sipped it anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Dr. Richardson?" a voice called out. I turned to see one of the new nurses, her badge reading Nora Wood, RN, catching the light. I had noticed her before, of course. It was hard not to. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her youth, and her subtle smile seemed to brighten even the darkest corners of the ER. Before I could respond, the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged us into darkness. The backup generators should have kicked in immediately, but something was wrong. Only the dull red glow of emergency exit signs remained. "Damn," I muttered, reaching for my phone's flashlight. The storm must have knocked out both main and backup power, something I'd never seen happen in my career. Through the darkness, I heard footsteps approaching, quick but measured. "I have candles in my locker," Nora's voice came closer. "Used to keep them for meditation, but I guess they will serve a better purpose now." There was a hint of amusement in her tone that made me smile despite the situation. We made our way to the locker room, our phone lights casting long shadows on the walls. The thunder outside grew louder, and through the windows, lightning illuminated the parking lot in brief, bright flashes. The hospital felt different in the dark, more intimate somehow. Nora produced 3 candles and a box of matches from her locker. "Last ones," she said, lighting the first one. The warm glow softened her features, making her blue eyes appear almost ethereal. I found myself staring longer than professionally appropriate. We shared the candlelight, working together to check on patients and maintain calm in the darkened ER. Time seemed to slow down, measured now in the steady drip of rain against windows and the gradual melting of wax. Nora's shoulder occasionally brushed against mine as we moved through the dim corridors, each contact sending an unexpected thrill through my body. As we stood guard over the last candle, huddled together at the nurse's station, she turned to me. "You know, Dr. Richardson, I have been wanting to talk to you properly for weeks now." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of the powerless hospital, it felt loud enough. I looked at her, really looked at her, in the flickering candlelight. The shadows danced across her face, and something shifted in the air between us. She leaned closer, ostensibly to shield the candle's flame from a draft, but her proximity made my breath catch. Before either of us could say anything more, our faces now inches apart, the lights suddenly blazed back to life. We jumped apart, blinking in the harsh fluorescence. The spell was broken, but something had changed irrevocably in those dark hours. "I should go check on my patients," she said, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. As she walked away, I touched my lips unconsciously, wondering about what almost happened in the darkness. The night shift suddenly felt very different, and I knew sleep would be elusive when I finally made it home. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of meaningful glances and careful distances maintained. But every time thunder rolled outside, I found myself remembering the warmth of her nearness and the way the candlelight had made everything seem possible, even things I had long ago decided were not for me. The following week was torture. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nora's face in the candlelight. Professional boundaries had always been my strong suit, but something about that night had cracked my carefully constructed walls. I threw myself into work, taking extra consultations and volunteering for additional shifts, anything to keep my mind occupied. But Nora was everywhere. Each morning, I would find a fresh cup of coffee on my desk, made exactly how I liked it, strong with just a splash of cream. No note, no words exchanged, but I knew it was from her. The gesture was both thoughtful and maddening. I would sit there, staring at the steam rising from the cup, trying to convince myself that this was nothing more than friendly collegiality. "The new nurse seems quite taken with you, doctor." Sarah Martinez, my longtime colleague, commented one morning as she caught me gazing at the coffee cup. "I have not seen anyone pay such attention to your caffeine needs before." I schooled my features into professional neutrality. "She is just being courteous. The entire staff has been exceptional lately." The words sounded hollow even to my own ears. The hospital corridors became a maze of charged encounters. Every time Nora and I passed each other, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken words. She would give me these small, knowing smiles that made my heart race like a teenager's. It was ridiculous. I was 42 years old, for heaven's sake, not some lovesick young resident. The whispers started about a week after the blackout. I caught fragments of conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered the break room. Nurses huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. Even the typically oblivious doctor. Thompson raised an eyebrow when Nora handed me my morning coffee one day. "Dr. Richardson," she had said, lingering by my desk longer than necessary. "I was wondering if you would like to grab dinner sometime. To discuss the new emergency protocols, of course." Her voice was steady, but I noticed her fingers fidgeting with her badge. I should have said no. I should have maintained those professional boundaries I had spent years perfecting. Instead, I heard myself saying, "That would be nice." The smile she gave me in return was worth all the gossip in the world. The tension between us grew with each passing day. During rounds, I would feel her eyes following me. In meetings, she would sit just close enough that I could smell her subtle perfume, something fresh and citrusy that made concentration nearly impossible. One afternoon, I overheard two nurses in the medication room. "Did you see how Dr. Richardson looks at Nora?" one whispered. "And Nora brings her coffee every morning. Something is definitely going on there." I cleared my throat loudly before entering the room, giving them time to compose themselves. They scattered like startled birds, but the damage was done. The rumors were spreading, and I needed to address this situation before it spiraled out of control. That evening, I stayed late in my office, attempting to draft an email to HR about professional workplace relationships. The cursor blinked mockingly on my screen for an hour before I deleted the entire thing. Who was I kidding? This wasn't about workplace policies or professional boundaries anymore. A soft knock on my office door made me jump. Nora stood in the doorway, still in her scrubs, her hair slightly messy from a long shift. "Your light was on," she said simply. "I thought you might need this." She placed another cup of coffee on my desk, this time with a small piece of paper tucked underneath. I waited until she left before unfolding the note. An address and a time for tomorrow evening were written in neat handwriting, followed by the words, "No shop talk, I promise." Sitting there in my quiet office, surrounded by patient files and medical journals, I realized I was standing on the edge of something that could either be the biggest mistake of my career or the beginning of something extraordinary. The sensible thing would be to ignore the note, to maintain those professional boundaries that had served me so well for so long. Instead, I carefully folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket, already knowing I would be there tomorrow evening. Professional consequences be damned. I sat in my car outside the small Italian restaurant, watching raindrops race down the windshield. The address Nora had given me led to a cozy place tucked away in a quieter part of Irvine. My fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel as I debated for the 100th time whether I should go through with this. The restaurant's warm lights beckoned through the drizzle, and I could see Nora already seated at a corner table through the window. She had changed out of her scrubs into a simple blue dress that made her look even younger than usual. My heart did a peculiar flip in my chest. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my umbrella and stepped out into the rain. The hostess greeted me with a knowing smile, as if she could sense my nervous energy. "Your friend is waiting for you," she said, leading me to the table. Nora stood up as I approached, and for a moment we both hesitated, caught between professional courtesy and something more intimate. "You look beautiful," she said softly, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. I had spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing my outfit, eventually settling on a black dress I hadn't worn in years. "So do you," I managed, settling into my seat. The candlelight between us reminded me of that night in the hospital, but this time there was no emergency to hide behind, no professional duties to retreat to. The conversation started tentatively, with safe topics like hospital politics and difficult patients. But as we shared a bottle of wine, our talk drifted to more personal territory. I learned about her childhood in Seattle, her dreams of becoming a writer before choosing nursing, her love for old jazz music. "You know," she said, twirling pasta on her fork, "I have had the biggest crush on you since my first day at the hospital." Her boldness stunned me into silence. "The way you handle crisis situations, how you treat every patient with such compassion, I couldn't help myself." Thunder rumbled outside, making us both jump. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke, rain now hammering against the windows. We should probably head out before it gets worse, I said, though I didn't want the evening to end. We rushed to our cars under my umbrella, pressed close together against the wind. In the parking lot, protected from the rain by the small overhang, Nora turned to face me. "Melissa," she said, using my first name for the first time. "I know this is complicated. The age difference, working together, but I can't stop thinking about you." Lightning flashed, illuminating her face. She was so close I could see droplets of rain clinging to her eyelashes. The thunder that followed seemed to shake the ground beneath our feet, or maybe that was just my heart pounding. Before I could think better of it, I leaned in and kissed her. Her lips were soft and tasted faintly of wine. She responded immediately, one hand coming up to cup my face while the other gripped my waist. The umbrella clattered forgotten to the ground as I pulled her closer. The kiss deepened, and I felt years of loneliness and professional restraint melting away in the rain. It was reckless and wonderful and terrifying all at once. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, another flash of lightning lit up the sky. "We should get out of this storm," I whispered, but made no move to let go of her. Nora smiled, that bright, confident smile that had first caught my attention. "My apartment is just a few blocks away," she said. "We could have coffee, wait out the rain." I knew we were standing at a crossroads. If I went home now, we could perhaps pretend this evening never happened, maintain our professional relationship. But looking into her eyes, I realized I didn't want to pretend anymore. "Coffee sounds perfect," I said, and the joy that lit up her face made my heart soar. We ran to her car through the rain, laughing like teenagers, our hands clasped together. As we drove through the stormy night, I felt more alive than I had in years, despite knowing that tomorrow would bring new complications. The storm continued to rage outside, but for once I didn't care about being sensible or maintaining boundaries. Sometimes the heart knows better than the head. And tonight, I was choosing to follow mine. The next morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. 15 years of medical training had taught me to analyze situations objectively, to weigh risks against benefits. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for this. Last night's kiss lingered in my memory, making it hard to focus on anything else. The age gap between Nora and me seemed more pronounced in the harsh morning light. She was 27, barely starting her career, while I was dealing with the first signs of aging, subtle lines around my eyes that no amount of expensive cream could hide. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Missing your coffee this morning?" I smiled despite my concerns, remembering how we had completely forgotten about that promised coffee at her apartment, too caught up in each other's presence. The hospital corridors felt different that day. Every time I passed the spot where we had shared candles during the blackout, my heart rate increased slightly. I tried to maintain my professional demeanor, but I caught myself watching the nurses' station more often than necessary, hoping to catch a glimpse of blonde hair. During rounds, Nora demonstrated her expertise while presenting a complex case. Her confidence and knowledge impressed not just me but the entire team. She handled questions from senior staff with grace and showed a depth of understanding that went beyond her years. Later that afternoon, we found ourselves alone in my office, reviewing patient charts. The tension was palpable. "You were brilliant in rounds today," I said, trying to keep things professional. Nora moved closer, ostensibly to look at the chart I was holding. "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, her voice low. The space between us crackled with electricity. Before I could respond, her lips were on mine, and all thoughts of professional boundaries evaporated. The kiss deepened, and I found myself backing her against my desk. Papers scattered to the floor, but neither of us cared. Her hands tangled in my hair as mine found their way to her waist. The world outside my office ceased to exist. A knock on the door made us spring apart. "Dr. Richardson?" It was Dr. Martinez. "The board meeting starts in 5 minutes." "I will be right there," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Nora was already straightening her scrubs, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. We quickly picked up the scattered papers, avoiding eye contact. "Dinner tonight?" she whispered as she headed for the door. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As she left, I caught Dr. Martinez giving us a curious look from the hallway. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and patients. I couldn't stop thinking about how right it felt to hold Nora, despite all the reasons it should feel wrong. The age difference, the professional complications, the potential impact on both our careers, all these concerns swirled in my mind. That evening, over dinner at my place, Nora sensed my unease. "You are overthinking this," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Age is just a number, Melissa. And I am not some naive rookie who doesn't know what she wants." "It is not just the age difference," I admitted. "I am your superior at work. People will talk. It could affect your career advancement." She laughed, the sound warm and confident. "Let them talk. I can handle myself. I didn't become a nurse to win popularity contests. I became a nurse to help people and to be true to myself. And right now, being true to myself means being with you." Her words touched something deep inside me. I had spent so many years putting my career first, building walls around my heart, that I had almost forgotten how to let someone in. But Nora wasn't asking me to choose between my profession and happiness. She was showing me how to have both. As we cleared the dishes together, our movements synchronized as if we had been doing this for years, I realized she was right. I was overthinking everything. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head catches up. Later that night, as we lay tangled in my sheets, all my carefully constructed arguments about age differences and workplace dynamics seemed ridiculous. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom, with Nora's heartbeat steady against my chest, I finally allowed myself to believe that sometimes the most unexpected choices lead to the greatest happiness. The only question now was how to navigate this new reality at work, where gossip spread faster than any virus and professional reputations were as fragile as glass. But feeling Nora's gentle breathing beside me, I knew whatever challenges lay ahead would be worth facing together. The first tremor hit at 2:47 a.m. I was reviewing charts in the ER when the floor began to shake. At first it felt like a large truck passing nearby, but within seconds the vibration intensified. Coffee cups crashed to the floor, and overhead lights swayed ominously. "Everyone under doorframes or desks," I shouted, my emergency training kicking in. Through the chaos, I spotted Nora efficiently directing patients away from windows. The earthquake intensified, throwing supplies off shelves and toppling equipment. The rumbling sound became deafening. For what felt like eternity but was probably only minutes, the building shuddered around us. When the shaking finally stopped, the emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in harsh fluorescent light. The devastation was immediate and overwhelming. "Melissa," Nora called out, already triaging patients. "We have multiple injuries coming in." The highway overpass collapsed. Her voice was steady, professional, despite the chaos surrounding us. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of pride mixed with concern for her safety. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of broken bones, crushed limbs, and concussions. Nora and I worked in perfect sync, anticipating each other's needs without words. She handled the pressure with remarkable composure, even as the casualty count kept rising. A rescue worker burst through the ER doors carrying a child with a head wound. "There are more trapped in a collapsed apartment building," he reported, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "We need medical personnel on site." I volunteered immediately, knowing the risks but unable to ignore the call for help. To my surprise and concern, Nora stepped forward as well. "I am coming with you," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The look we exchanged spoke volumes, both professional respect and personal worry evident in our eyes. The scene at the apartment complex was like something from a disaster movie. Concrete slabs lay at dangerous angles, and the air was thick with dust and desperation. We worked alongside firefighters and rescue teams, crawling into unstable spaces to reach trapped victims. Hours passed as we treated injuries and helped coordinate rescues. Aftershocks kept everyone on edge, each rumble sending hearts racing. During a brief break, Nora and I found ourselves alone behind an emergency vehicle. "Are you okay?" I asked, noticing her hands trembling slightly as she reorganized her medical kit. Without warning, she pulled me into a tight embrace, her face buried in my neck. For just a moment, we allowed ourselves this comfort amidst the chaos. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When the first shock hit, all I could think about was finding you." Her confession made my heart ache. Before I could respond, another aftershock hit, sending us stumbling against the vehicle. We broke apart quickly, professionalism taking over as more victims needed attention. But something had shifted between us, working side by side through this disaster. We had moved beyond the initial attraction and workplace romance into something deeper. As dawn broke over the devastated city, we finally returned to the hospital. Both of us were exhausted, covered in dust and grime, but still standing. The ER was quieter now. The initial wave of casualties processed and stabilized. Finding an empty on-call room, we collapsed onto the small bed, too tired to care about hospital gossip. Nora curled into my side, her breathing evening out almost immediately. I held her close, listening to the occasional rumble of distant aftershocks. In the quiet aftermath of the disaster, I realized that age differences and workplace complications meant nothing compared to the connection we had forged. We had seen each other at our most professional and most vulnerable, working seamlessly together through a crisis that tested both our skills and our hearts. As I drifted off to sleep, still holding Nora, I knew that our relationship had been tempered by this disaster like steel and fire. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger for having survived this night. The earthquake had shaken our city to its foundations, but it had also cemented something between us that no natural disaster could break. In the midst of chaos, we had found our anchor in each other. I was reviewing earthquake damage reports in my office when Sarah Martinez knocked on my door. Her expression made my stomach drop. "Melissa, there is someone here to see you." Catherine Wood. The name hit me like a physical blow. Catherine, my ex-partner from 5 years ago, the woman who had left me for a prestigious position in Boston. I hadn't heard from her since. "She is waiting in the hospital cafe," Sarah said gently. "Apparently, she is here coordinating disaster relief efforts." Of course she was. Catherine had always had perfect timing when it came to disrupting my life. I found her exactly where she had been directed, looking as polished as ever despite the circumstances. Her dark hair was streaked with elegant gray now, but her smile was just as disarming as I remembered. "Melissa," she stood, arms open for an embrace I reluctantly returned. "I saw the news about the earthquake. I had to make sure you were okay." We sat, falling into an awkward conversation about the past 5 years. Catherine talked about her successful career, her comfortable life in Boston, carefully avoiding any mention of why she had left. I nodded politely, acutely aware of how different I felt about this woman now. "Dr. Richardson?" Nora's voice cut through the tension. She stood at our table, holding 2 coffee cups. "I brought your usual." Her voice trailed off as she noticed Catherine. "Nora, this is Catherine Wood, an old colleague," I said, watching Catherine's eyebrows raise at my hesitation. "Catherine, this is Nora Wood, one of our most talented nurses." The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as the 2 women sized each other up. Catherine's smile turned calculating. "Wood? No relation, I hope?" "None at all," Nora replied coolly, setting my coffee down with precise movements. Her possessive stance wasn't subtle, and I saw the moment Catherine figured it out. Well, Catherine's laugh was sharp. "I see some things have changed. Isn't she a bit young, Melissa?" Before I could respond, Nora spoke up. "Old enough to know what I want and stay for it." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine's smile faltered. Later that evening, I found Nora in the supply closet, aggressively organizing bandages. "Want to talk about it?" I asked, closing the door behind me. She whirled around, eyes bright with unshed tears. "She left you 5 years ago. I heard the nurses talking." Her voice cracked slightly. Are you still in love with her?" The question surprised me. "No," I said firmly, stepping closer. "That ended a long time ago. You are the one I want, Nora. Only you." She moved first, pressing me against the shelves with a fierce kiss that took my breath away. All the tension and jealousy of the day poured into that kiss, her hands gripping my lab coat as if afraid I might disappear. We broke apart at the sound of footsteps passing by, both breathing heavily. "My place tonight," Nora whispered against my lips. "I need to show you exactly how much you mean to me." That evening, we left all thoughts of Catherine and the past behind, losing ourselves in each other until the world outside ceased to exist. Every touch, every kiss was a promise, erasing any doubts that might have lingered. The next morning, I ran into Catherine as she was leaving the hospital. "I am happy for you," she said, surprising me with her sincerity. "She clearly adores you. Just don't let your fears ruin it like you did with us." I watched her walk away, feeling strangely peaceful. She was wrong about one thing, though. I hadn't let my fears ruin us. She had chosen her career over our relationship. With Nora, it was different. We were building something together, supporting each other's growth rather than competing. Nora found me still standing there, slipping her hand into mine. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of concern. I squeezed her hand, smiling. "Everything is perfect." And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. The past few days had shown me that what Nora and I had was real, tested by natural disasters and ex-partners alike. We had emerged stronger, more certain of our connection. Sometimes it takes seeing your past to fully appreciate your present, and my present was standing right beside me, holding my hand like she never intended to let go. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of my second coffee when Nora burst into my office, her face flushed with excitement. "I got it. The fellowship at Mayo Clinic." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips as my mind processed her words. The Mayo Clinic, one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the country, had offered her a specialized trauma nursing fellowship. It was an incredible opportunity, the kind that could launch her career to new heights. It was also in Minnesota, over 2,000 miles away. "That is wonderful news," I managed, forcing a smile. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, but I couldn't let her see that. This was her moment, her achievement. "I am so proud of you." Nora's excitement dimmed slightly as she studied my face. "It is only for a year," she said softly, perching on the edge of my desk. "We could make it work. There are phones, video calls, holidays." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. A year, 12 months of empty mornings without her coffee deliveries, of quiet nights without her laughter filling my apartment, of cold hospital corridors where I wouldn't catch glimpses of her blonde hair disappearing around corners. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine procedures and patient consultations. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. Every time I saw Nora in the hallways, she gave me that same uncertain smile, as if waiting for me to say something, anything, about her news. That evening, alone in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and really thought about the situation. Was I being selfish? Was I holding her back from achieving her full potential because of my own fears and desires? My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Can we talk?" 20 minutes later, she was at my door, still in her scrubs, her hair messy from running her hands through it, a habit she had when stressed. "You have been avoiding me," she said, stepping inside. "I haven't been." I started to protest, but she cut me off. "Yes, you have, because you think you need to be the noble one here, right? Step aside so I can advance my career?" Her voice cracked slightly. "But did you ever think to ask me what I want?" I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. "Nora, the Mayo Clinic is one of the best hospitals in the country. This fellowship could open so many doors for you." "I know that," she said, sitting beside me. "But there are other opportunities. Irvine Memorial is expanding its trauma center. They are looking for specialized nurses to help develop the program. I could learn just as much here. But it wouldn't be the Mayo Clinic," I argued. "I can't be the reason you turned down such an amazing opportunity." I couldn't live with myself. Nora took my hands in hers, forcing me to look at her. "You are not the reason. I am making this choice for myself. Yes, the Mayo Clinic would be incredible, but so is what we are building here, together. I just don't want you to regret staying," I whispered, voicing my deepest fear. She laughed softly. "The only thing I would regret is leaving. I love you, Melissa, more than any fellowship or career advancement." It was the first time either of us had said those words. They hung in the air between us, warm and real and terrifying in their implications. "I love you too," I replied, the words coming easier than I expected. "But are you sure about this?" Instead of answering, she kissed me, pouring all her certainty and passion into the gesture. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine. "I am sure about us. The rest we can figure out together." That night, as we lay tangled in my sheets, I realized that sometimes the biggest career moves aren't the ones that take you farthest from home, but the ones that help you build something lasting where you are. Nora had taught me that love wasn't about sacrifice or stepping aside, but about growing together, supporting each other's dreams while creating shared ones. The Mayo Clinic would always be there, but what we had found together was rare and precious. Sometimes the bravest choice isn't taking the leap, but staying still long enough to let roots grow deep. Thanksgiving dinner wasn't exactly how I had planned to meet Nora's family. Yet here I was, standing on her parents' doorstep in suburban Irvine, clutching a bottle of wine like a shield. Nora squeezed my hand reassuringly, but I could feel the tension in her grip. "They will love you," she whispered, though we both knew that was far from certain. Her parents were conservative people, and while they knew their daughter dated women, they had never quite accepted it. Adding our age difference and workplace dynamics to the mix made things even more complicated. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Wood, a petite woman with Nora's blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. "Welcome," she said, her smile not quite reaching those eyes as she assessed me. Mr. Wood stood behind her, tall and imposing in his silence. The house was immaculate, family photos covering the walls. I noticed that recent pictures of Nora were conspicuously absent. The dining room table was set perfectly, like something out of a magazine spread. Nora's sister Emma, her husband, and their 2 children were already seated. "So, Dr. Richardson," Mrs. Wood began as she served the turkey, "how long have you been Nora's supervisor?" The emphasis on the last word made me wince internally. "Mom," Nora warned, but I placed a calming hand on her knee under the table. "Almost 2 years now," I replied evenly. "Though our relationship began only recently, we maintain strict professional boundaries at work." Mr. Wood grunted. "Boundaries. Interesting choice of words." The tension around the table could have been cut with the carving knife. Emma's children, oblivious to the adult dynamics, chattered about their school play, providing welcome breaks in the uncomfortable conversation. "Aunt Nora, are you and Dr. Richardson going to get married like Mommy and Daddy?" little Sophie asked innocently, making both her grandparents choke on their wine. Before anyone could respond, Emma stood up. "Nora, would you help me get dessert ready?" The sisters disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with their parents and Emma's husband, who suddenly became very interested in his phone. "She had such promise," Mrs. Wood said quietly, almost to herself. "We thought after medical school didn't work out, she would at least settle down properly." "Your daughter is one of the most talented nurses I have ever worked with," I said firmly. "She saves lives daily. She is respected by everyone at the hospital. You should be proud." "Proud?" Mr. Wood finally spoke directly to me. "Of what? Her throwing away the Mayo Clinic fellowship to stay here with this arrangement?" I felt my professional calm starting to crack. "That was her choice. I actually encouraged her to take the fellowship." "Did you?" Mrs. Wood's voice dripped with skepticism. "Or did you just say that to appear supportive while knowing she would stay?" Before I could respond, Nora and Emma returned with pumpkin pies. One look at Nora's red-rimmed eyes told me the kitchen conversation hadn't gone well either. After dessert, Emma followed us out to the porch. "Give them time," she said, hugging her sister. "They will come around eventually. They did with Tom after his divorce." "That was different," Nora replied bitterly. "He at least brought home a younger woman." The drive home was quiet until Nora suddenly pulled over and turned to me. "I am so sorry about all of that. You didn't deserve any of it." I reached out to wipe a tear from her cheek. "Hey, at least the pie was good." She laughed despite herself, then grew serious. "They don't matter, you know. What they think, what they say. You are my family now." The words warmed something deep inside me. We sat there in the car, holding hands, letting the truth of her statements sink in. Family wasn't always about blood relations or traditional expectations. Sometimes it was about choosing each other every day, despite the challenges and judgments. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Nora traced patterns on my arm. Emma texted me. She said she has never seen me happier, and that is all that should matter to them. I pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe time would soften their views. But even if it didn't, we had built our own kind of family, one based on love and choice rather than obligation and expectation. The holiday hadn't gone as planned, but it had cemented something important, our commitment to each other, regardless of what anyone else thought. Sometimes the hardest family gatherings become the foundation for something stronger, something truly worth being thankful for. The summons to the hospital board meeting came on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Wilson, the chief of staff, had called me personally. "Melissa, we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about professional conduct." My stomach dropped. I had known this was coming, had been dreading it since Nora and I decided to be open about our relationship. The hospital had no explicit policy against relationships between staff members, but the power dynamics of our positions made things complicated. The boardroom felt colder than usual as I took my seat facing the committee. Dr. Wilson sat at the center, flanked by other senior administrators. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but I could sense the underlying tension. "Dr. Richardson," Dr. Wilson began, "your record here has been exemplary. However, recent developments have raised questions about your judgment and professional boundaries." I maintained my composure, though my heart was racing. "I assume you are referring to my relationship with Nurse Wood." "Yes. Several staff members have expressed concerns about favoritism and potential conflicts of interest. We need to ensure the integrity of our department is maintained." Before I could respond, the door opened and Sarah Martinez strode in. As head of HR, her presence wasn't surprising, but her next words were, "I have reviewed all performance evaluations and shift assignments since Dr. Richardson and Nurse Wood began their relationship. There is no evidence of preferential treatment. In fact, Nurse Wood has taken on more challenging cases and difficult shifts than before." The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Dr. Thompson, leaned forward. "That may be true, but perception matters in a hospital environment. The age difference alone raises eyebrows." With all due respect, I found my voice, steady and clear. "My personal life is my own. My professional conduct has never been questioned before, and it shouldn't be now. Nora, Nurse Wood, is one of our most competent staff members. Our relationship has never compromised patient care or hospital operations." The meeting continued for another hour, discussions circling around policies and procedures. In the end, they couldn't find any concrete reasons to object, but the underlying disapproval was clear. Walking back to the ER, I noticed the subtle looks and whispers from staff members. News traveled fast in hospitals. Some nurses quickly looked away when I passed, while others offered supportive smiles. I found Nora in the break room, anxiety written across her face. "How bad was it?" she asked quietly. "Nothing they can act on," I assured her, keeping a professional distance despite wanting to hold her. "But we will need to be extra careful about maintaining boundaries at work." The following weeks were challenging. Every interaction between us was scrutinized. We worked different shifts when possible, communicated through other staff members, and kept our distance during rounds. The strain was evident in both of us. One evening, after a particularly difficult trauma case, I overheard two nurses discussing us. "They barely look at each other anymore," one said. "Maybe the board got what they wanted." But they were wrong. Our connection had only grown stronger under the pressure. We had learned to communicate through subtle glances, brief touches during patient handoffs, and notes slipped into charts. Our professional relationship had become a carefully choreographed dance, maintaining appearances while preserving what mattered most. Nora proved herself repeatedly during this time, handling complex cases with skill and confidence. Even those who had initially raised concerns couldn't deny her competence. She never used our relationship to avoid difficult assignments or seek special treatment. Late one night, as we finally left the hospital after separate shifts, she pulled me into an empty stairwell. "I hate this," she whispered against my neck. "Having to pretend we are just colleagues." I held her close, savoring the brief moment of privacy. "I know, but we are stronger than their prejudices. This too shall pass." And slowly, it did. As weeks turned into months, the scrutiny began to fade. Our professional excellence spoke louder than gossip. Younger staff members, particularly, seemed to find inspiration in our ability to balance personal happiness with professional integrity. Dr. Wilson called me into his office again, this time with a different tone. "Your department's performance metrics have actually improved over the past quarter," he admitted. "Whatever you and Nurse Wood are doing, it seems to be working." That evening, as Nora and I walked to our cars, we no longer felt the need to maintain distance. We had weathered the storm together, proving that love could coexist with professional excellence. Sometimes the greatest acts of defiance are simply living your truth with dignity and grace. The hospital corridors that had once felt like a gauntlet of judgment now just felt like home again. We had found our balance, neither hiding nor flaunting our relationship, but simply being who we were, two professionals who happened to love each other. The letter sat unopened on my desk for hours. The Massachusetts General Hospital logo was clearly visible through the envelope's window, making my heart race every time I glanced at it. I had applied for their chief of emergency medicine position months ago, long before Nora had entered my life. Finally, during my lunch break, I opened it. The words "pleased to offer" jumped out at me, followed by a salary figure that made my eyes widen. It was everything I had dreamed of professionally, a chance to lead one of the most prestigious emergency departments in the country. "You have not touched your coffee," Nora said, appearing in my doorway with fresh cups for both of us. She noticed the letter immediately, her expression shifting as she read the hospital's letterhead. "Is that Mass General?" I confirmed, watching her face carefully. "They offered me the position." She sat down slowly, her coffee forgotten. "In Boston." It wasn't a question. We both knew what this meant. 3,000 miles of separation, different time zones, opposite coasts. "I haven't accepted yet," I said quickly. "I wanted to talk to you first." Nora's smile was gentle but sad. "This is your dream job, Melissa. You have talked about Mass General since we first met. You can't turn this down because of me." "I can't imagine not seeing you every day," I admitted, reaching across the desk to take her hand. "The job might be in Boston, but my heart is here." She squeezed my hand, then stood up, pacing the small office. What if we found a way to make it work? I could apply for positions at Boston hospitals. The healthcare system there is amazing, and with my experience. "You just established yourself here," I interrupted. "The trauma center program, your family." "My family barely speaks to me," she laughed without humor. "And the trauma center will survive without me. Boston has some of the best hospitals in the country. It could be an opportunity for both of us." I stared at her, this incredible woman who had turned my life upside down in the best possible way. "You would do that? Move across the country?" "For you, in a heartbeat." She came around the desk, kneeling beside my chair. "I love you, Melissa. Whether we are in Irvine or Boston or anywhere else, that won't change." That evening, we sat on my balcony, researching Boston hospitals and housing options. Nora's enthusiasm was contagious, her laptop screen filled with job listings and apartment rentals. "Mass General has an excellent nursing program," she said excitedly, "and Beth Israel Deaconess is always looking for experienced trauma nurses. Plus, think of the fall colors, the history, the culture." I watched her plan our future with such confidence and joy, and suddenly the decision didn't seem so difficult. "We could get a place in Cambridge," I suggested. "Close to the hospitals but away from the city center. With a spare room for when Emma and the kids visit," she added, her eyes shining. "They would love Boston in the summer." As we talked late into the night, our future taking shape in the warm California evening, I realized something profound. The biggest decisions in life aren't about choosing between love and career. They're about finding ways to have both. The next morning, I called Mass General to accept their offer. The relief in my voice surprised me, as if some part of me had known all along that this was the right choice, not just for my career but for us. When I told Dr. Wilson about my decision, he seemed genuinely disappointed to lose me but understanding. "Sometimes life presents opportunities we can't ignore," he said, looking meaningfully at Nora through my office window. Later, as we walked through the familiar hospital corridors that had witnessed the beginning of our love story, Nora turned to me. "Are you scared?" she asked softly. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also excited. We are starting a new chapter together." She kissed me then, right there in the hospital hallway, not caring who saw. "Together," she repeated. "That is all that matters." The Massachusetts winter would be a shock after California's eternal sunshine, and we had countless details to sort out. But standing there with Nora, I knew we could handle anything life threw at us. Sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Boston in spring was nothing like Irvine. The city had welcomed us with a mix of rain and sunshine, much like our journey here. After 6 months as chief of emergency medicine at Mass General, I had finally found my rhythm, and watching Nora thrive in her new role at Beth Israel made everything worthwhile. Our Cambridge apartment had become home faster than I expected. The spare room had already hosted Emma and the kids twice, their visits filling our home with laughter and creating new memories. Even Nora's parents had started making tentative steps toward reconciliation, impressed perhaps by our commitment to building a life together. Tonight was special. We had planned a small gathering to celebrate our 1-year anniversary, though our guests didn't know the real reason for the party. Sarah Martinez had flown in from California, along with a few other close friends from Irvine Memorial. The spring sunset painted our rooftop terrace in golden hues as our friends mingled, drinking wine and sharing stories. I caught Nora's eye across the space, and she gave me that secret smile that still made my heart skip. "Remember when you two were trying to hide your relationship?" Sarah laughed, raising her glass. You were about as subtle as a marching band. The gathering felt intimate and perfect, just like we had planned. As the evening wore on, I nodded to Nora. It was time. We had discussed this moment for months, wanting it to be just right. Everyone, I called out, getting their attention. Nora and I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This isn't just a housewarming party. Nora joined me, taking my hand. This past year has taught us that home isn't about a place. It is about the people you choose to share your life with. I squeezed her hand, feeling the small box in my pocket. But before I could reach for it, Nora continued speaking, which is why. She reached into her own pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made me gasp. Our friends erupted in laughter as we both stood there, each holding ring boxes. Great minds think alike, Sarah called out, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. Well, Nora said, her blue eyes sparkling with joy and tears. I guess we both had the same idea. We opened our boxes simultaneously, revealing rings we had chosen independently yet somehow complemented each other perfectly. The moment was better than any planned proposal could have been, spontaneous and sincere and entirely us. Marry me? We both asked at the same time, causing another round of laughter and tears from our friends. The rings fit perfectly, as if they had been waiting for this moment. As we kissed, our friends cheering around us, I felt complete in a way I never had before. Later that night, after our friends had gone, and we stood on our terrace watching the city lights, Nora traced the ring on my finger. You know what this means? She asked. We will have to tell my parents we are both wearing engagement rings. I laughed, pulling her close. I think they will survive. Emma can break the news to them. The city stretched out before us, full of promise and possibility. We had come so far from that candlelit night in the hospital, yet every step had led us exactly where we needed to be. 1 year ago, I had worried about age differences and career choices, about distance and family acceptance. Now, standing here with my fiancé in my arms, those concerns seemed trivial. Love, real love, had a way of sorting out the details. Remember when you said you couldn't imagine not seeing me every day? Nora murmured against my shoulder. Now you never have to. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the garden below, a reminder that the best things in life often come with change. We had built something beautiful here, a life filled with purpose and love, proving that sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards. As we headed inside, our rings catching the last light of day, I knew this was just the beginning of our story. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, just as we had everything else. The future stretched out before us, bright with promise and possibility, and I couldn't wait to discover it with Nora by my side. Sometimes the perfect ending is actually just the perfect beginning.